is such a rich history in recipes from the past. Today, I'm gonna share 100 years worth. Welcome to Meals with Maria. Today, I am going through the past 100 years of recipes. We're gonna talk about everything that happened in the past 100 years and how that really impacted cooking and how things changed over time. I'm not gonna be too chatty. We're gonna talk a little bit about each thing kind of that happened in each decade, and I'm gonna share a ton of different recipes all through the different decades. We're gonna jump right in and start with the 1920s. Now, while fashion may be quite different, think like flapper dresses and snazzy suits, the food was actually somewhat similar. You may see some of these things on our table today, but there are a few differences. One thing is the 20s was a time of prohibition, so there was no alcohol on those tables whatsoever, or people were sneaking it by making gin in their bathtubs, which sounds scary and fun at the same time. Now, food was different because seasonings were less. They had less spices available, so the food was a little less seasoned. And the meat had to be cooked more well done. As far as the vegetables, same thing, because there was no refrigeration. So it took them a lot longer to create meals because you had to smoke something or can it, any sort of food preservation, salt it. It would just take longer. So yeah, those things don't sound too great. We were having overcooked, under-seasoned food. But we can take those recipes from the 20s and make them even better today, and there was some really good stuff back then. We're starting off by making this authentic German potato salad from Speck's restaurant in St. Louis. You need 5 cooked strips of bacon, so I'm just cooking those up, and I am boiling a big pot of water because we're going to get our potatoes boiling in just a minute here. The author of this recipe actually ate at this famous Speck's restaurant in St. Louis almost every day and always ordered the potato salad. So when the owner learned that she was getting married, he actually gave her the recipe as a wedding gift. So this is kind of a really fun recipe with an amazing backstory. So you need about 3 pounds of medium red potatoes, and you know the saying, waste not, want not. So my potatoes had some eyes on them, and I just want to cut those off and then put them in my boiling water, and you're going to boil that for about 30 minutes until tender. While those are cooking, you can dice up your 5 strips of bacon and make sure to reserve 4 tablespoons of the bacon drippings because we're going to end up cooking the onion within the bacon drippings. A good option here is also to use the real bacon pieces from Walmart, or if you really don't have anything like that, you can even use like the tiny little bacon bits from Dollar Tree, and I'm sure that it would be, a fine substitute. And you also want to chop up 1 medium onion. Again, the onion is kind of an important part of it, but if you don't have that, go ahead and use onion powder, and I'm sure it will taste great. Once your potatoes are done, drain them and cool them, and then you want to cut them into, and I didn't follow this instruction properly, but they should be 1/4-inch slices, so kind of like rounds, but I did mine in just like a regular potato salad dice, and it was fine. So whatever you want to do is totally fine. Then you want to saute the onion in the reserved bacon drippings over medium heat until the onion is tender. So that's going to be about 5 to 7 minutes. Once your onions are tender and sauteed, add in 1/4 cup of flour, 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed salt, and 2 teaspoons of salt. Stir until blended, and then add 1 cup of apple cider vinegar, 3/4 a cup of water, and 1 1/4 cups of sugar. And yes, it is a lot of sugar, but it gives it this sweet and tangy flavor, so it does end up being absolutely delicious. When I did my video on cooking like the Amish, a few of you commented that your Amish recipe was actually like a German potato salad recipe. And this makes sense because the Pennsylvania Dutch are actually referred to as Pennsylvania Germans, and they're part of a group of German immigrants that settled in Pennsylvania during the 18th and 19th centuries. So there are comparisons. The German potato salad is also potentially a Pennsylvania Dutch recipe, but it also, I see similarities in the dressing and that sweet and tangy flavor with the sugar and the vinegar. So once you mix it, you want to bring it to a boil over medium-high heat and cook and stir for about 2 minutes until thickened. Then you can add in the potatoes and the bacon and cook and stir gently over low heat until heated through. When this is finished, you can sprinkle it with some parsley, and it's recommended that you serve it warm. So that's the different thing about a German potato salad is you're going to eat it warm versus cold. And I traditionally have always had cold potato salads, so it's very interesting to have that warm. And it's absolutely delicious. It's one of my stepmom's favorites, so I served it for her birthday with some steak tips and some rolls. And I do have all the recipes for those things down below in the description box as well if you want to know some great marinade recipes and some roll recipes with ranch dressing mix. Those are fabulous too. So this recipe overall was fantastic. It's a really cool 1920s recipe, and really cool that this woman, I think her name was Violet, got this recipe for her wedding gift. This next recipe is for great grandma's Italian meatballs, and like I said, these became popularized in the 1920s. So it's a classic, but it's delicious. You want to chop up 1 medium onion and saute that over medium-high heat with a couple tablespoons of oil for 3 to 4 minutes until tender. Then you want to add in 2 cloves of minced garlic and cook for about a minute longer, and then you're just going to let it cool while we mix everything else together. This recipe makes 8 servings, so I'm going to make about half the recipe today. So I'm going to start with a 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, and then we're going to do, it says 3/4 cup of seasoned breadcrumbs, so I'm going to do a 1/4 cup and then a 1/2 cup. I know there's, math behind that, but when you're using little cup measures like this, just do 1/4 cup and then a 1/2 cup because that's all you have. And then because my onions and garlic are cooled, I'm just going to put those in there. Then you want to add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of each basil, oregano, and dried parsley flakes. To that, add in 1 pound of ground beef. The recipe actually calls for 1 pound of ground turkey and 1 pound of ground beef, and I just had 1 of ground beef. So whatever you have, make it work. I think, do both, and you can make you can make the regular recipe for 8 servings, or you could just do ground turkey. I've done ground turkey meatballs plenty of times, and they are fabulous. To that, I'm adding 1 egg, and then we're going to mix everything together. You don't want to mix it too much, but you want to make sure that everything is fully mixed together. Then I'm going to use a cookie scoop to shape these into about 1.5 inch meatballs. And I'm placing the meatballs right onto my sheet pan with a baking mat, but you could use tin foil, or you could use parchment paper, or you could spray down your pan and make sure that the meatballs don't stick that way too. You want to cook these at 375 degrees for about 20 minutes, and they come out absolutely perfect. On the side, I just cooked up some spaghetti according to the package and some just regular tomato sauce. I didn't make my own today. I just went with the store-bought stuff, heated that up, poured it over, and everything was delicious. Meatballs are always a winner in my house. They're one of our top 10 budget meals. They're one of our favorites, so you really can't go wrong with it, but it's always fun to think about period cooking and think about the fact that the first time that these were published in a cookbook was in the 1920s. So delicious meal that is still popular today. Now, as great as those 20s recipes may be, we enter the 30s, which is the Great Depression era. During the Depression era, people were thrifty. They were able to save and ration their food. We always hear about people that lived during the Great Depression having stockpiles of cans and canned goods and really knowing how to make something out of nothing. So these recipes are just that. They're using things that you already have in your pantry, and they are easy to make something out of nothing. They taste delicious, and I think they're great tools to help us during this tougher time where prices on food are higher than they have been in my lifetime, at least. I know lots of people are stocking up, so these are great recipes to use those stocked up items and make some things that still taste really good. The first recipe I'm gonna make today is a stovetop goulash. You wanna start with 1 pound of ground beef, or I think you could definitely use ground turkey. This is also a great recipe to stretch your ground beef, so if you'd like, you can just bring that down to 3/4 pound, and I think you could still have an awesome meal for a family of up to 5 or 6, because we're gonna serve this with vegetables over mashed potatoes, so it's still gonna be plenty hearty with a little bit less meat. You want to cook your beef in a large skillet over medium heat until it's no longer pink. Make sure you're breaking it into crumbles as you cook it, and then drain out any excess fat. I use a little method where I just put a little paper towel in there, and it seems to soak up the fat just fine. You then want to add 1 16-ounce package of frozen vegetables, 2 cans of condensed tomato soup, 1 cup of water, 1 small onion chopped, and 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce. For spices, you want to add 1 teaspoon of garlic salt, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, a half a teaspoon of dried oregano, a half a teaspoon of paprika, 1/8 a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, an 1/8 a teaspoon of pepper. You can see this meal is relying heavily on a spice cabinet, and I think that makes sense. It has very low ingredients and a lot of spices to make it taste good. I think that there are some swaps you could do here. So if you don't have frozen vegetables, I think a can of mixed vegetables would be just fine, or maybe 2, or just a can or 2 of your favorite vegetable if that's what you'd like to do. You also could use onion powder instead of a fresh onion, maybe even the bottoms of some scallions if you have them. You can switch it out for any sort of onion flavored thing, and I think that would taste just fine too. You want to bring this to a boil and then simmer it uncovered for 10 minutes. This should thicken up your goulash, and then you want to serve it over mashed potatoes, rice, or in my case, I used a rice cauliflower, which tasted great too. You could use box mashed potatoes, you could use store-bought mashed potatoes. The recipe actually calls for store-bought, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that's really Depression era, but grab some potatoes and you could make potatoes to put underneath that, and I think that would really make it a hearty meal. Whatever you want to do, this is absolutely delicious. I thought the flavor was fantastic, and it's a great way to use up some extra cans in those cabinets. The next recipe is for smoky stovetop baked beans, baked in quotation marks, and bacon. Can't go wrong with anything with bacon. You want to heat a large saucepan over medium heat. You're going to add the bacon to that, cooking until it's almost crispy. This took about 7 minutes for me. I said the bacon. I think I meant 4 strips of cut up bacon, but you could add, as little or as much as you want or have. As always, I want to talk a little bit about alternatives. If you don't have bacon, I think that sliced deli ham or a ham steak would be a great alternative here. Or you could use turkey bacon. That's quite a bit cheaper than a regular bacon these days. While your bacon is cooking, you want to rinse and drain 2 cans of pinto beans, but you could always cook up a whole thing of dried pinto beans, and you're going to have a lot more pinto beans for a lot less money. That is a choice as well. Once your bacon is almost crispy, you want to add in 2 cloves of minced garlic and 1 diced onion. Saute the onion until translucent, about 3 to 5 minutes. Stir in the beans, 1 cup of dark beer. So I used a can of Guinness that I had left over in my refrigerator, so it was a perfect use for that because we aren't really dark beer drinkers here. 1/4 cup of ketchup, 1 tablespoon of chili powder, and 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. And then you're going to want a pinch of cayenne pepper. I really like this recipe because it didn't include molasses or anything that I didn't really have on hand. I had everything that I needed in my pantry. You want to simmer this until the sauce thickens, and that's going to take about 15 minutes. I actually did mine for closer to 20, and it turned out fine. I went outside and kind of forgot about things inside, which is not safe. Don't do that. But hey, it turned out really, really good, and I absolutely love these baked beans. I was such a fan. I served them with some chicken drumsticks that you'll see in another recipe video, so that is something to look forward to. Overall, this is a fantastic meal that now I know if I have a few things in my pantry, I can make these up anytime, and they are so cheap. I definitely want to make this for a family gathering next time I have people over for a barbecue. The next recipe is for crunchy tuna salad with tomatoes, and I feel like tuna salad is one of those things that you always want to have a good recipe for because it's Saturday afternoon and everyone's looking for lunch, and you're like, what the heck am I going to make? If you don't have any leftovers, you're going in that cabinet, you're grabbing a can of tuna, and you want to have a go-to recipe on hand. Another thing I loved about this recipe was we actually served it with tomatoes, so it was so refreshing. At the top of the recipe, the person who actually created the recipe mentioned how this is so good on a hot day, and it happened to be a hot day when I was making it, so I was like, oh yes, this is perfect. This is my perfect lunch right here, and I'm going to use this all summer long. This recipe calls for 12 ounces of white albacore tuna, and I actually just wanted to do like half the recipe because I was the only one that was going to have this for lunch on this particular day. So I used a 5-ounce can, so it's going to half everything. So I'm using 1/4 cup of minced onion, and you really do want to cut your onion up smaller when you're having it in a salad like this, unless you just really like chunks of onion. But I did want to slice mine smaller because I don't really want it to feel like there's onion galore in there. And then a half a stalk, or I just used a small stalk of sliced up celery. And these are the things that are going to make this salad crunchy, and it does give it a lot of crunch and flavor. Then I'm just gonna add my drained can of tuna. I wish I had chunk white tuna, like that big chunky white tuna, but I just had chunk light tuna, which is a little bit different. And it's not quite as like fresh feeling, but it still tasted really good. It's important to use what you have. Now the recipe calls for 1/3 cup of mayonnaise, and I put my whole 1/3 cup in there. You can use whatever mayonnaise you have. I just had a video on how to make your own mayonnaise to make it super cheap. So I'll link that video down below if you wanna know how to make your own, you wanna move towards that. You can use whatever your favorite mayonnaise is though, that'll be just fine too. Sprinkle in a little bit of salt. I probably did 1/4 teaspoon, and a tiny sprinkle of dried parsley. I'm gonna be honest, it still tasted delicious, but that was a little bit much on the mayonnaise for me. So if I were to go back and do it, I think I would cut it down to 1/4 cup of mayonnaise next time, or maybe add in a little bit more celery or onion. Both are fine and will make it taste delicious. To serve with this, just slice up as many tomatoes as you like, and this makes a fresh and refreshing meal, and it's nice because it's low on the carbohydrates if you're looking for that. Now I'm just gonna kind of interject here before we hit the 1940s and kind of skip ahead to today. So back then we had to make everything from scratch. There was not a lot of choices, especially during the Great Depression. But I want to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video. That is like the 2023 way to eat. So up until the 2020s, at some point, meal kits started being delivered. And HelloFresh is my favorite meal kit delivery. There's a bunch of them that I really enjoy, but HelloFresh is something that I've said this before, I used when I was pregnant with Ben. I use when I'm in a pinch or bind when my husband is away for work. And it's something that I think that you can use as well. The thing about HelloFresh is it takes the stress off of you having to meal plan or figure out what you're gonna eat, and also gives you exactly the right amount of ingredients for that meal. And that actually leads to 23% less food waste, which I love. You guys know I'm like low on food waste, big on savings. It also is cheaper than the grocery store and 25% cheaper than getting takeout. So on those tough nights when it's really difficult, or tough weeks when somebody's sick, it's hard to get to the grocery store, HelloFresh is gonna be the perfect option for you. It's gonna save you money and it's gonna waste less. Now, not only do I love HelloFresh, but my kids and my husband love HelloFresh. Everything that I have ever made, they have devoured. We recently made the beef flautas supreme, and it was so good. Tommy requested to have it for lunch the next day. So I love something that the whole family is into and is simple to create for us, and all those ingredients are on hand. And not only that, I always love that we get these recipe cards, because with my favorite ones like this is definitely a favorite, gonna go into the recipe box. Now I have the recipe for the future. So if for some reason I'm not getting HelloFresh that week, but I still have the ingredients to make the order, I can actually use this in order to make something that I know my family already loves, and then I'm not wasting from my own fridge. And with HelloFresh, you don't have to worry if you're not a pro in the kitchen. It's super easy to follow all of the steps on the card, chop up your ingredients and cook. It's made for everyone, I swear. Like I've said before, when I was pregnant with Ben, Dan used to do it for me, and he's not much of a cook in the kitchen, but he can definitely follow the instructions and get something done. And that way we have basically a restaurant quality meal at home for less, and I didn't cook it. You are always getting seasonal ingredients picked at peak ripeness, and they're delivered from kind of the farm to your house in less than 7 days. And you know, along with the 2020s and the meal kit deliveries and the HelloFresh that is so delicious, you are also getting deals. So the deal I have for you today, go to HelloFresh.com and use the discount code MealsWithMaria50 to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code MealsWithMaria50 for 50% off, plus your first box ships free. Can you tell us what you think?
I give it a 5 out of 5. By the way, I already ate it, so I ate. 5 out of 5.
Now, just as people thought they might be leaving the Great Depression and maybe leaving those recipes behind, which I still think were very good, we have the 1940s, which is really the World War II era. So there was a lot of rationing going on back at that time. This is the time of World War II, so these are wartime ration recipes. And it's actually a very good Sunday meal I have for you today, as well as a great lunch or dinner idea. And these things are gonna be meat replacement type things and using what you have on hand, because during those ration times, it was mostly meat and sugar and dairy that was rationed. So those things are light, so we have to kind of swap things out and figure out other ways to make delicious meals. And I have to say, I did not feel like I was eating during the wartime ration era when I made these, so I'm excited to share them with you. I am finally making oatmeal meatloaf. People have told me about this before when I have made my stuffing meatloaf, and I've always meant to try it. You want to start with a large, lightly beaten egg and add in 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 1 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 cup of ketchup, and I heard that tomato sauce also works here, or I think tomato soup. Now this is an interesting addition, 1/3 a cup of evaporated milk, and I don't work with evaporated milk much, but I assume that it's something that's nice and shelf stable, so it's easy to keep on hand through, any tough time. For oats, we're going to use 3/4 a cup of quick cooking oats, and this is going to be what really helps to stretch our ground beef in this meatloaf recipe. The recipe calls for 1.5 pounds of ground beef, but I'm actually just going to use 1 pound because that is what I have. And you could use ground turkey here too. I think that is a great option. And I've made meatloaf with ground turkey before, and you can barely even tell the difference. It is a great budget choice if you only have a few bucks, and you can get some at Walmart for the latest price, I think is $2.20. The meat that I'm using, I actually grabbed on Manager's Special. It had like a big red sticker on it, and it was like $1.50 off. So always watch for those things and throw any of those Manager's Special right in the freezer. And then you can use that ground beef next time you need to use ground beef in a recipe, and you're going to be all set, and you're not going to have spent the full price ever. Now, when I made this, I somehow forgot to add a 1/4 cup of chopped onion, and it was still really good. So, hey, if you don't have chopped onion, don't add it. As always, you can use a teaspoon of onion powder instead, or just don't add it at all, and it'll still be delicious, because I was surprised afterwards. I'm like, oh no, I forgot the onion. I'm like, this is still great. It's still good as it is. And then you want to add this to a loaf pan if you have one. And like I said in a recent video, for some reason, my loaf pan, it got ruined, and then I didn't buy a new one. So I'm just going to make a little loaf in my 9x9 pan here on some parchment paper, and this works great too. So whatever you have, go ahead and make it work, and you can just shape that right into whatever shape you want. You can even make a heart. You can make like a heart-shaped meatloaf, because you are loved. You want to bake this uncovered at 350 degrees for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. So this is a long one. Plan ahead. Make sure that you have enough time, because it does really take a while to cook all the way through. Now this recipe, I can't even find the website where I initially found it, but it was like a list of things that people ate in the 40s during wartime, and it was super simple. So it's just 2 cups of canned or fresh corn, 2 cups of tomatoes. It does not specify, so I used canned, but if you have fresh, go ahead. A teaspoon of sugar, a tablespoon of butter, and a teaspoon of salt. And then I just mixed everything together in a pie pan. And then it says 1 cup of breadcrumbs, and it does not specify how you're supposed to do these. So maybe you know better than I do and you've heard of this recipe before. You can comment below and tell me what I did right or wrong. But I just mixed about 3/4 of it around within the casserole. And then I topped the rest of it with the 1/4 cup of it. And then I baked this in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes just to heat it up and kind of make it into something. And it was quite good. My family loves corn, so we're big fans. And you add a little tomato to that. You add a little bit of breadcrumbs and butter and salt and sugar. And so it's salty, sweet. And this was fabulous. It went really well with that meatloaf. You can see how this meatloaf came out now. We serve these 2 things together with a little bit of rice that you'll see in a later video. And this is an absolutely fabulous 1940s wartime meal. I was totally into it. This was probably like if you were going to have this, maybe like a Sunday dinner in the 40s. And it was really wonderful. These days, you can make a sandwich for lunch, no problem, just with some deli meat. But in the 40s, during wartime, meat was hard to come by. So many people actually ended up having their own chickens, or there was chickens in their neighborhood, and they ended up with a lot of eggs, and eggs was a great protein option. So a very popular lunch idea was a egg salad sandwich.
People were making their own bread for these sandwiches and boiling up their eggs and then making an egg salad sandwich, which is one of my favorite things anyway. So I wanted to share a special 1940s zippy egg sandwich with you guys, and I'm even using my own homemade sourdough bread. For one sandwich, you want to start with 3 hard-boiled eggs. Yes, it seems like a lot. It's definitely a filling sandwich. It could probably serve 2, so you may want to make 2 sandwiches with this. And you can coarsely chop them before you put them in the bowl, or I just like to put mine in the bowl and then smash them up with a fork, and that's just my preferred method. You want to add in 1.5 teaspoons of prepared mustard and 3 tablespoons of mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is always that thing where it depends on how much you like and what you like, so I end up usually using a little bit more just because I am a mayonnaise fan. To that, go ahead and add 1/8 teaspoon of salt and 1/8 teaspoon of pepper. I am going bare bones today because I didn't have a lot of additional stuff. You can also add 1 tablespoon of minced green onion if you have it, and 1/8 teaspoon of lemon juice. And then go ahead and slice up or dice up some tomato and slice up your bread and assemble the sandwich. And this is such a great lunch on a hot day. This is one of those tried and true, has stood the test of time recipes that is still as good today as it was then, and there is no shame in eating it. It's not like, oh my goodness, this is a ration recipe. This is absolutely delicious. So just a reminder that egg salad is very inexpensive and amazing, and the 40s had it right. The recipe I had definitely called for making your own corned beef, but here's the issue that I had. I think that back then, if you had one side of corned beef and you were trying to ration it out, which makes sense, you should add some potatoes to that and you're going to get a lot more out of your meat. So corned beef was a very popular recipe during that time. However, these days for me to buy a side of corned beef and it's not on sale for St. Patrick's Day, it was going to cost me like $15 to $20. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy $15 to $20 worth of meat, and neither are you. But you can get a very inexpensive can of corned beef hash for $2.50, around there, hopefully even cheaper. I think I might have even seen it at Dollar Tree, so that'd be like $1.25. So either way, we're finding a better deal these days on that canned corned beef and hash, and honestly, I think it's quite delicious when you cook it this way. So that's just a personal opinion. Also, very interesting about corned beef hash is that it was found in C rations. They were the packs that the soldiers would carry, and it was a popular thing to find in there, which I think makes sense because it's definitely like a higher calorie food. It gives you a lot of bang for your buck kind of thing. Cooking this, I just like to take my 2 cans of it and put it into a pan over medium-high heat and let it crisp up on both sides. So we're gonna let it cook for about 5 minutes on one side and then flip it over and cook it for another 5 minutes on the other side. Now, if you have a cast iron pan, I recommend you just use that so you can pop it right into your oven, and I actually do not. That's on my list though, I want to get one. So I put mine into a small 8x8 pan, and then I'm gonna put my eggs in it and then we'll pop it in the oven. Now, I was a bit surprised by the addition of the eggs here because eggs were a rationed item. But I guess you could use your eggs for the week for this, or if you're just doing like mostly corned beef and hash and then just having 1 egg, that seems like a reasonable addition. But I think corned beef hash on its own with some toast or something like that would be delicious as well. So I think the main point to this recipe is that you are using potatoes to kind of fill in that smaller amount of meat that you have. You want to bake this at 325 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes, and definitely check on those at the end there to make sure that your eggs don't get overcooked and also make sure that they're not undercooked. But hey, this is a great reminder of how delicious this breakfast, or you can even have it as a dinner is, and there's so much flavor here and it's so inexpensive. This next recipe is such a winner. You're going to actually slide some vegetables into your mashed potatoes. You want to start by chopping up 3 medium to large size Yukon Gold potatoes. And while you're doing that, you can get a salted pot of water started boiling on the stove. You can just add your potatoes to that water once you've cut them all up. Then I'm just going to shred up 2 carrots. I'm not even going to peel those because they're going to go right into the mash. You won't even know, and you're going to get lots of extra vitamins and minerals from the outsides of them. Same thing with the potatoes. I figured let's not peel those because they are Yukon Gold, so they have a pretty soft skin, and that's also going to give you extra nutrition. Go ahead and add those carrots right to the potatoes in the boiling water, and you can let those boil for about 12 minutes. You want to make sure that your potatoes are super tender and ready to mash when they're done. And just a little tip, I am leaving that wooden spoon in my pot because if you leave it in there, it's unlikely that that water will boil over. And I'm adding about 3 or 4 tablespoons of butter to this. You could use whatever fat you have, especially during the World War II times. You would probably use like drippings or grease, or you may use bacon fat, or really anything that is fatty. You just want to mash these up. I'm using a hand masher. If you want to use a hand mixer, that's always a good option as well. And this makes an amazing mash. Like, my family absolutely loved it. And I'm like, why would I ever not put carrots in my mashed potatoes from now on? Add in as much salt as you like, and you have a delicious mash to serve with your dinner. In this next recipe, we're going to be making, you guessed it, potatoes. More potatoes, lots of potatoes. I'm using 3 red potatoes, and we're going to make twice baked potatoes. Now, I'm just popping these in the microwave because that's what the recipe said, but I don't think there were microwaves during World War II, so you might want to bake those in the oven, which is totally fine. In the microwave, I stab them with a fork for a little bit and then cook them for 12 minutes. Add to a bowl a 1/4 cup of milk, a 1/4 cup of sour cream, 1 tablespoon of butter softened, 3/4 of a teaspoon of dried parsley flakes, 3/4 of a teaspoon of garlic, a 1/2 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Then you want to slice your potatoes once they've cooled off. And I think the key to this recipe is, although some of these items are going to be, quote, rationed items, we're not using a lot of them, and we're really relying on the potato to be the main source of food and energy in this. And you'll see I am going to serve mine with other things for dinner, but I really think that maybe during World War II, people would just eat these twice baked potatoes like as a meal, as their main source of energy for the day. You want to scoop out the inside of your potato, leaving 1/4 inch thick shells. Add that excess potato to your milk and sour cream mixture. Mash everything together. And then scoop your mixture back into your hollowed out potatoes. You can top this with shredded cheddar or Monterey Jack cheese. And I happen to have a couple of strips of bacon laying around, so I was like, let me crumble that on top. You can also get bacon bits at the Dollar Tree that would taste delicious on top of this. Or if you have like a little bit of crumbled ham, kind of along the same idea. If you have rationed food, you don't have a lot of meat, but you have just like a little bit, you can just add that right on top. And then we're going to bake these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes.
Now, as we move out of the war era and we move more into, I guess, a little bit of stability, the 1950s and 1960s were all about convenience foods. So manufacturing really ramped up, and you'll notice in these next recipes that you're gonna see a lot of conveniences showing their mark.
And when I think of the 60s, I'm thinking tie-dye and bell-bottoms, but I think at home it was a little bit different. And at-home cooking was based a lot on convenience items, very flavorful things that you could find in your pantry. And the cocktail party was like all the rage. Now, the kids were just talking to me about the 1960s and the meaning of cocktail, and they thought, did they eat a lot of fruit cocktail? That was a good question. I said, no, they're just like finger foods. Tommy says, like fish sticks? Not exactly. Although maybe they were popular in the 1960s.
Meatballs.
Meatballs, yes. So we'll have a recipe with meatballs. We'll have a couple of other finger food recipes that are great for cocktail parties, but they're things that we still use today. But I did want to pick some recipes with like a little bit of a different twist on them, and I think these worked out great.
This next recipe is so easy. We're making tuna noodle casserole. So you're just gonna need 8 ounces of egg noodles, and this container actually has 12, so you will have some left over. A 1/2 cup of milk, 1 can of cream of mushroom soup. I'm actually gonna use the recipe from Campbell's. 2 cans of tuna, and 1 thing of green peas. Now, I do realize this is $6, so if you need to get down to the $5 mark, definitely take out a can of tuna. It's not going to make a huge difference for you. You're still going to get tons of flavor in there. Now, this recipe, like I said, is so easy. We're just going to cook our egg noodles according to the package, and then everything else we're just going to mix in, and then put it in a casserole dish and cook it for 20 minutes in the oven. After that 20-minute mark, you do want to stir it a little bit, and then you can serve it. Now, the recipe on the website does say that you can use some breadcrumbs and butter on the top to make like a little crust, and I think that would be absolutely delicious, but I do not think it's necessary. So do you, and do whatever you need to do. I do also want to encourage you guys to give this video a like if you're liking what you see so far. And feel free to comment below and let me know what other Dollar Tree things that you'd like to see. I love making Dollar Tree meals, but I'd love ideas from you guys as well so that I can provide more content that you love. Now, I messed up this last part and I did not get me pouring it into the casserole dish, but I just simply poured it into one, and I'm actually going to eat this tomorrow night. I did taste it, of course, and the Campbell's recipe is on point. We are making Grandma's stuffed celery. Now, I've had stuffed celery before, and most of the time I think it's just like cream cheese with some garlic powder or something inside the celery. Not something I've ever made before, because to me, I'm not knocking it if it's one of your favorites, but it hasn't been one of my favorites, right? Well, I saw this recipe and I thought, let's try this out, because this is a little bit different than at least my experience has been. We're going to be using some pimento stuffed green olives, and I love green olives. I love that salty flavor, especially mixed with cream cheese. I feel like, why do they not have green olive cream cheese for bagels? Because I think that would just be fabulous. So I cut up a bunch of stalks of celery, as much as you want to serve. I wasn't having too big of a group of people eating it, so I didn't make too many. For that cream cheese stuffing, I'm taking a little bit less than a half a cup of green olives and just chopping those really finely. And we're going to mix those with 1 package of cream cheese at room temperature with some garlic powder. Probably about a teaspoon. And if you have fresh chopped garlic, or you have some fresh garlic you can chop up, go ahead and use that, because that is what the original recipe calls for. But me, in the essence of time on this particular day, I was like, let's just throw some garlic powder in here, and it was absolutely phenomenal. You can also salt and pepper this to taste, and just mix everything up really well. Like I said, I just wanted to serve this on a bagel, but it was, a lot more carb friendly and delicious on the celery, with that crunch of the celery as well. You just want to fill your stalks of celery with your cream cheese mixture. And if you have any left over, I do actually recommend, aside from a bagel, just putting it on a cracker is absolutely great. I tried it on like a club cracker, and I thought this was a great filling. So it's something I might make up and not even put in celery all the time. It's just a great dip as it is. I feel like the 1960s was full of all these recipes that we still see today, and I was surprised that, that's kind of when they originated and when they started, because I never really think about that kind of stuff. I found that the wedge salad, which we're not going to make today, but is absolutely delicious. It's a quarter head of iceberg lettuce with some blue cheese dressing, blue cheese crumbles, and bacon. That was very popular in the 1960s, and maybe started in the 50s, but it's questionable. But either way, it was like kind of a 1960s staple, which is a fun fact. This next recipe is for, yes, cocktail meatballs. Now, I don't know that they were using frozen meatballs back in those times, but for me, this is a convenience item that is super helpful sometimes. Obviously, make your favorite meatballs if you want to go that route, but I do find that if you're comparing like a pound of ground beef and a pound of cocktail meatballs frozen, it actually ends up pretty close sometimes. So look for those deals, look for those sales, and get those frozen when you can, because they're a great thing to keep in the freezer to throw out there at the last minute. Another great thing about this recipe is it's a 3-ingredient recipe, much like the last recipe. We have chili sauce, or you can use cocktail sauce, or you can use barbecue sauce. I'm just using the whole container of chili sauce. I feel like every time that I've done something like this with whatever I find in my fridge, which would be one of those 3 things, pouring the whole thing in there works just fine. And then we're going to add 1 container of grape jelly. Again, I'm not exactly sure on size. I just grab the one that they have at Aldi and put that in there, and it tastes delicious. So I wouldn't be too worried about whatever size you have on hand. I've also tried this with apricot jam and barbecue sauce, and that was phenomenal. So the cool thing about these is you kind of make them whatever you want, but I believe that the traditional style that started in the 1960s was the grape jelly and the chili sauce. Now, slow cookers were developed in the 1950s, but they really didn't become popular in the US until the 1970s. So during the 60s, many of the recipes were actually for baked meatballs. But now today's version of this, as things have changed and come about, definitely everybody knows this as their perfect, most favorite. Even it's called a cult classic crock pot recipe. So there are families that I know have eaten this for years around the holidays, and it's a must-have. And I'm kind of one of those families. It's absolutely fabulous. You want to cook these in your slow cooker on high for 4 hours, and they turn out absolutely amazing. They are a winner every time. You can't miss. I mean, you can't mess this up. It's awesome. For this next recipe, we're going to make a version of French onion dip using Lipton onion soup mix. This recipe became popular starting in 1954, but became really, really popular in the 1960s. Now, the original recipe was with sour cream and the Lipton soup mix, and that is it. And that is traditionally how I've always made it. It was also called California dip because I guess the dip was started in California. So for a long time, they only referred to it as California dip, which is very interesting. Today, maybe I'm going to start calling it California dip from now on. I don't know. But I found this recipe, which was a little bit different, but kind of took a different spin on some other dips that had actually been made earlier, I think. And you're just going to use some cream cheese and a packet of the soup mix and a 1/4 cup of milk. And I mixed this all up, and I thought, this is just far too thick for me. I'm used to my sour cream dip. So in the end, I did end up adding about 1/2 cup of sour cream to this. Now, the benefit to this is sometimes I don't have a whole container of sour cream and I'm heading to a party or I'm heading somewhere and I need to make something fast. And I thought this would be a good try, a good way to see like alternative ingredients, right? If I always have Lipton soup mix in my cabinet, what can I use to end up making a dip if I don't have that big thing of sour cream? So I think in the end, I would say if you have a little bit of sour cream and you have some cream cheese, you can then make a very good French onion dip or California dip from the 1960s without having that whole container of sour cream. So it's just an alternative option. You don't have to go shopping and you don't have to stress if it's something that you already have on hand.
Now, I think we're going to continue to see those convenience foods follow all the way through into 2023. We still use quite a bit of them, but things do start to change as far as cooking goes. And in the 1970s, it became more of like an international cuisine. So people started trying out new ingredients. They started trying things from different areas. Quiche, fondue, chicken Kiev, shrimp cocktail, and beef Wellington were all very popular in the 70s. 70s was all about partying. So all these were very popular party foods to have. And they also served Waldorf salad, which I'm gonna show you a recipe for right now.
Next up, I'm gonna make a chicken salad croissant sandwich. And this is a variation on that Waldorf salad that I talked about earlier. And we're gonna switch a few things in and out, and it's gonna be a little different than the original, and I'm gonna work with what I have. So that's how we do things around here. You're gonna want 1 cup of red grapes, and we're gonna cut those in half. To that, you wanna add 2 cups of shredded chicken. Now I'm using a rotisserie chicken. You can cook up some chicken in your Instant Pot. I'll make sure to put a recipe for that down below, just super simple. You can do it in the crock pot, or you could use canned chicken. So if canned chicken is what you have, and that's the most affordable thing these days, go ahead and use a couple of cans of chicken, and that will treat you very well when it comes to a chicken salad. And you also want 1 rib of celery. Now I do have a fresh celery, but hey, if you buy like a big pack of celery and you think, well, I don't need just one rib for this salad, you can actually slice that celery up, put it in the freezer, and reuse it later. It defrosts really well. I also cut up 1 scallion. Alternatively, you can use diced yellow or red onion or a teaspoon of onion powder. and then add in 1/3 a cup of Parmesan cheese. And the recipe calls for buttermilk, but I'm actually going to do a couple squeezes of lemon instead of doing the buttermilk. For spices, you want traditional 1920 spices such as 1 teaspoon of dried parsley flakes, 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of dill weed, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then you want to mix it all together with about 1/2 cup of mayonnaise. This is give or take. I feel like mayonnaise in a salad like this is always how you like it. I'm a mayonnaise person, so I always put a little bit extra, but you can go a little bit lighter too. And because we didn't put that 1/3 cup of buttermilk in, it may be a little bit drier. That's kind of how I like mine, so I just kind of compensated by adding the lemon and the extra mayo. But you can instead alternatively do 1/3 cup of buttermilk or the squeeze of lemon juice and then 1/3 cup of milk, because that's actually a good substitute for buttermilk, because the buttermilk is actually just kind of like a more acidic milk. So if you do like a teaspoon of lemon juice and some milk, you're going to basically make the same flavor as buttermilk. Now, I had never added Parmesan cheese to my chicken salad before, and I am a true believer now. I will add Parmesan cheese every time. It's absolutely delicious. It gives it a fantastic flavor. The original recipe calls for croissants for this, but there were no croissants at my store, and I had these delicious whole wheat rolls, and I figured, you know what, that's what we have, that's what we're going to eat them on, and it's still going to be good, right? But this is a great chicken salad recipe. It is so delicious. It was so good that we actually ended up reusing it and making a whole nother batch of it for when I went camping for lunches that day. And this particular day at home, I just served it on a whole wheat bun with some chips, and it was fantastic. Like, it's my new go-to recipe. That Parmesan cheese is everything. I mean, grapes in it, get that crunch from the celery. It's absolutely fabulous. And yes, this is here. I just mixed it up while we were camping. I brought it with me, no mayo, and then I added the mayo right before I made the sandwiches, and that worked out perfect. So that's a little tip for you. If you want to make a chicken salad, keep it cold in the cooler, but then add the mayo last minute so it doesn't get, soggy or whatnot.
I still order a Waldorf salad like that when I see it at a restaurant or like in like one of those deli cases. It's so delicious. Now, the 1980s came about and people started getting a little more health conscious. So you may have noticed like everything up until now, maybe not like as heavy on the vegetables. People weren't as focused on that kind of thing. And 1980s hit and sushi hits the scene, which I'm like, I love sushi. Comment below if you're like, ew, sushi, or also if you love sushi, just let me know what you think of that. The Caesar salad entered. We also have chicken teriyaki, chicken stir fry, which I'm a huge fan of, still make a ton of today, as well as pasta primavera. So pasta primavera came out about in the 80s, so super fun to like figure out all these different like famous or like fabulous meals that kind of came up at different times in the world. I personally, I'll tell you how old I am. I was born in 1987, so I'm a 90s baby, as they would say. Even though I was born in 87, I spent my childhood growing up in the 90s, so I know all about it. And the food that kind of hit the scene at that time, you're looking at caprese salad, which I still love, pad thai, grilled salmon, fettuccine alfredo, all favorite things that still definitely are on like menus and plates today. And the chicken Caesar wrap. So they took the Caesar that they developed and they figured, let's put it into a sandwich. And yet again, still a huge winner. I know I see it on like every deli menu, and there's a reason for that, because it's a time-tested favorite. Another thing that hit the scene in the 90s is black bean soup, and I feel like I've shared this and maybe a little too much, but I'm gonna share it again. My black bean soup recipe, it's super inexpensive, super delicious. You just cook it right up in the crock pot. You're gonna love it.
We need 1 medium bell pepper, cored, seeded, and diced, and I did not have a red bell pepper, but I did have a green one. And I knew that I was gonna make another recipe the next day, and that also required a green pepper, and I only had 1. So we just split the green pepper in half. It still tasted delicious. Both meals were absolutely fine with half the green pepper. It was plenty of pepper, plenty of flavor. Even like in my family, they don't love peppers, so they were not missing it by any means, but it did add the right flavor. So, I mean, use what you have. Sometimes even if I can get like one of those little containers of roasted red peppers from the Dollar Tree, I will use that in a recipe like this. You don't always need all of the ingredients, or sometimes you can cut things down and you still get all of the good flavor. So yeah, just slice up your green pepper. And
then you're gonna want 1 medium onion diced. And I just talked about onions in my $10 or less video, and I will post that below in the description box if you haven't watched it yet. But basically, onions are an amazing budget-friendly thing to keep on hand. You can find pounds of them for like $1.99, and they pretty much give flavor to everything. Now, if you don't have onions or you don't have money for onions, then it's absolutely fine to just buy onion powder and use that instead. And meals like this, I have often substituted garlic powder or onion powder, and it turned out absolutely delicious. So just your choice whether you want to buy the fresh, or if you have the powder on hand already and you are really on a tight budget, go ahead and use the onion powder and it will still taste delicious. What I like about this recipe is it really is a true chop, dump, and go. A lot of times when you have onions and peppers, you do need to cook those prior to putting them in the crock pot, but in this case you do not. To the onions and peppers, I'm adding 2 bay leaves and then 1 pound of uncooked black beans. Now, I know you're supposed to wash them and I always forget, and it always turns out fine. So, you know, to each their own. Spices, add 1.5 tablespoons of chili powder, 1 tablespoon of ground cumin, and 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. And you're also going to want 3 cloves of minced garlic. Similar to the onion, if you have garlic powder instead, you can use that as a substitute, probably about 1/2 teaspoon per clove. And then I happen to have vegetable stock on hand, so I decided to use that. I used 32 ounces of that, and then I added another 16 ounces of water and 2 teaspoons of chicken bouillon to this. So if you have chicken bouillon, that is always a great budget alternative to a stock, or you can save your vegetable pieces, save your meat pieces, and make stock on your own. Another alternative is always just water and salt. It does work. You want to cook this on low for 8 to 10 hours. There's not really a high cooking alternative here because these are dried beans and they need a lot of time to sit and get cooked. But as you can see, they cooked up perfectly in about 8 hours. So it does take a while, but you get a lot. And you saw how much water I added there, like it seemed really soupy. It does not end up being a very soupy soup. There is just a lot of beans in this, and that's not a bad thing. It's very hearty, it's very filling, and it is absolutely delicious. Like, my husband was so shocked. He said, "This is really flavorful. Wow, thank you." Like, really surprised by how delicious a black bean soup could be. And I served it with a little bit of Greek yogurt because that's what I have, but you can use sour cream, some cilantro, and cheddar cheese. And I cooked up some Jiffy cornbread for real cheap, and this was our dinner. Even the kids liked it. And we had leftovers. So as we exit out of the 90s, the 2000s hit, and we're still focused on healthy. We're also working on sustainability. But some of these things like make me laugh because I feel like they're just like so quintessential to like the early 2000s era, and they're still popular today, but you know that they definitely were not kind of like around the food scene during that time. So in the early 2000s, they saw I saw the addition of poke bowls and avocado toast and acai bowls, green smoothies, sushi burritos, and ramen noodles, which I make a ton of and are still delicious in my household today. But definitely like the noodle bowl, like the ramen at home kind of thing, really became popular in that 2000s era. Now the 2010s kind of just grew on top of the 2000s, I feel like, because we're still gonna see avocado toast, but sriracha became super popular. So if you're a big sriracha fan, we added that to the list in the 2010s. I remember people carrying around like little keychains. That's how good it was. There's Buddha bowls. Cauliflower rice hit the scene. I still use cauliflower rice today. It's super easy sometimes just to get like a healthy meal in, a healthy dish, and just throw it in instead of regular rice and keep it in the freezer so it lasts a long time. As for drinks, there was also like the addition of matcha, and then there's also the addition of what they call unicorn foods, which if you've seen at the grocery store, like everything being like purple and pink and glittery, and it's like a unicorn cereal. That's from the 2010 era, that's where that started. But as a delicious 2010 meal, I want to show you a burrito bowl because that's like a favorite in my family, and it's something that you should enjoy hopefully for the next 100 years because it's delicious and super easy. So for the next leg of this journey, I'm going to cook up all of the rice according to the instructions on the back of the package. For my burrito bowls, I'm using a can of black beans drained, and then I'm adding some onion powder, garlic powder, salt, any other seasoning that you kind of like to add. Go ahead and do that. You could even chop up an onion if you had one into that. I'm using like a chili lime. I like to season the plain black beans. It really kicks it up a notch and makes it taste delicious when it comes to your burrito bowl.
And then I'm using a bunch of chicken here, and I'm just seasoning this up. That is a taco seasoning from the Dollar Tree that I happen to have around. Now, I'll put a recipe for a taco seasoning down below if you want to make one yourself, or you can just add salt and pepper. It's going to be fine that way too, because you're going to have salsa and you're going to have sour cream and cheese and lots of other flavors that make everything taste delicious. So if you don't have seasoning, that is okay. You saw in the back there, I also cooked up the corn on the stove, and I also shredded half of my stick of cheese. Now, this is a lot of cheese, but we're going to have lunches tomorrow too. So here is one of the burrito bowls. You can see it's very hearty. These were so good. This is one of my family's favorite meals these days. The kids love it. We love it. And we also feel like we're being like relatively healthy when we have it.
And as we roll around to the 2020s again, and you remember those delicious meal kits that come from HelloFresh, make sure to get yours today and get your discount using my code. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code MealsWithMaria50 for 50% off, plus your first box ships free. I want to thank you so much for watching today. If you're looking for some more vintage recipes, click on this next video, and make sure the next time you're on YouTube, you're watching Meals with Maria.
She ordered 2 HelloFresh boxes, but she thought they only ordered 1.